This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Friday morning. It's February 9th, and we have a 24-point Wolves win in Milwaukee on Thursday night to get to. Most dominant performance of the season. I think certainly their best offensive game of the year. We'll also look back at the trade deadline a little bit that has now come and passed. We'll talk a little bit more about Monte Morris with Britt. Also got to ask Finch and a couple of players about Morris after the game, so we can reference some of that. But Britt, I want to focus on this game. It was a game against a good opponent on trade deadline day that I'm kind of sitting there. I'm like, feel like we've been talking about trades all day, and the Wolves are playing the Milwaukee Bucks. Granted, without Damian Lillard or Chris Middleton. But within that context, the Wolves looked levels above where Milwaukee was, and I thought the offense was a big part of that. The numbers say it was their best offensive game of the season. What part of the offense in that game stood out to you most?
Quick decisions, more than anything. I can't remember how few. It struck me how few plays there were where somebody was just dribbling the ball.
Yeah.
Almost never happened. There was the ball movement was crisp, the player movement off the ball. I mean, what's interesting to me is they did the things that are eminently predictable that they should do if they're going to play good defense. And so they did them, and they played good defense. Mm-hmm. Anthony Edwards had 9 assists and 0 turnovers, in large part because he got off the ball at the right times. He was patient in terms of not worrying about a double, not trying to break a double. Just remember how when a couple of years ago when people figured out that if Cat had his back to defenders, mm-hmm. they could double team him and then he would panic and whatever. Well, Ed doesn't necessarily panic. He just has this arrogance that he can beat that double rather than just get off the ball. Okay. And so 6 of his 9 assists were 3-point shots. 2 of the other 3 were dunks to Rudy. One, a little bit of the most moving dunk I've ever seen Rudy make. I mean, it's from like 7 feet out when he caught the ball. And then the other one was a floater by NAW. But the 6 times that were threes is exactly why I've been so impatient with Ant's mid-range game and his proclivity for just driving into people and getting fouls. I mean, I've kind of accepted that that's part of Cat's DNA. And by the way, he did that very, very few times this last night too. But the fact that Ant has a really good court vision, and when he focuses on it, is an extremely good passer, makes the kinds of passes that are not showboaty like Cat can be sometimes, but are also surprising to a defense. They can shift the floor. They can be skip passes. There was one last night that Jim P commented on where the bounce pass was high enough, even in traffic, where Rudy could catch the ball and then go up and dunk it. He just had a good judgment game. And I don't know whether this last loss was finally the straw that broke the camel's back on this team's offensive stupidity. But they were not stupid last night. They only turned the ball over 8 times. Cat had 9 dimes. Mike Conley had 9 dimes. Rudy had 4. And I thought the ball movement and the lack of dribbling were the big reasons, and Milwaukee's bad defense.
Yeah, the ball movement stood out to me too. Just I kept being like, wow, they didn't pass it on that possession, or they didn't dribble it on that possession. After they brought the ball up, got into action, bing, bing, bing. There was a bunch of those possessions. I thought it was the most effective the pick and roll game had looked, and I think that's where so many of these assists came from, whether it was directly to Rudy or Mike off of that, or swinging it to somebody to just get a good look out of the pick and roll game. And that was kind of the framework of where I went into post game, was like, okay, Finch, is this part of the answer? Is just more pick and roll part of the answer to improving this defense overall. And he got into what you were just talking about with Ant there. I'll play that clip here. How much can pick and roll be part of the answer for the offense here?
Well, I mean, it's always going to be a large part of every offense. I think I think what you see is like a developing chemistry, that's with Ant, and it's going to another level. Like, it's not just Ant finding Rudy. I mean, that was the first thing we had to try to unlock. But now it's like the timing of it, the setting it up, the when to go downhill, when to hold the screen, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of growing. And Ant's really done a good job of when they put multiple bodies in front of him in pick and roll or at the nail, of getting off of it. And that's triggered good ball movement. So
that's the thing, right? Is the ball movement kind of comes off of the end of that, right? If you don't immediately get, Rudy on the roll or a hockey assist to Nas in the corner or something like that, even if the pick and roll doesn't directly lead to a bucket, it's more frequently, or at least in that game, was directly leading to ball movement off of that. And they eventually sort of found a good look there. I do think Ant is growing, and this team, just giving that it has Rudy Gobert, it needs to be a team that's good in pick and roll, not just Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert pick and roll. They need to have additional guys, and obviously Anthony Edwards is the next guy you look to there. And
I was struck by what Mike Conley said a week ago when I asked him about structure in the locker room. You seem to have put more structure into the late game offense. And he said, yes, but there are still reads off that structure. And if you pause in your reads, then the structure breaks down because the flow, there's people hear flow and they think about Finch's flow offense, which everybody regards as just winging it. But there's also a flow to a structured offense, and that is being crisp in your decision-making and what you're doing, because the other four guys are doing things in a structured offense. They know what the play is, and so therefore they're moving to accommodate the play. And if somebody pauses a pregnant second or two, it's going to screw up the rhythm. And that is what I was impressed by last night, was that so many of those dimes looked like telepathy, because even if it wasn't like a set play call, a rhythm had developed that these guys have all played with each other long enough to know that when the ball starts moving in a certain time and certain place, that they can reasonably expect that they should reasonably at least adjust what they're doing to create that rhythm and further that rhythm. And so often, why this team has broken down on offense is because one of the two main scorers has decided to stop that rhythm and see if they can get something on their own. And it's just been sickening. It is, there's a tremendous amount of offensive talent on this team, and they've languished near the bottom 10, right above the bottom 10 all year. And I don't know as much as most of the people inside a team know about basketball, and it has been blatantly obvious to me. I've never been so sure of my diagnosis of what's going wrong with this team. And then you go to the stats, and they all match up to that. It's just, if I know it and I'm barking about it into the air, imagine what Chris Finch has been doing behind the scenes. He went over the entire fourth quarter of the Orlando collapse, and then this team goes and shits the bed again in Chicago. Finally, maybe they're getting a clue, because they've been so reliant on their defense all year. They can't continue to think that they will make hay in the postseason with a 19th ranked defense. It needs to be offense. I'm sorry. It needs to be at least above average. And it could very easily be above average. Last night it was 177 points per 100 possessions. That's my little rant.
No. I mean, that's the question with this team, right? In the last 30 games of the season is, can you be in this stretch of time an above average offense? Probably. If you want to have real aspirations of a run, you need to kind of ask yourself, can we be a top 10, maybe even better than that offense here? So, yesterday I was thinking about that a lot, obviously in the, shadow of Monte Morris being acquired. And so that was kind of like my question to Finn was about, he couldn't talk about Morris, but I'm like, what would this mean if you guys can just get up to average in terms of your turnover frequency when they've turned it over the third most in the league? And then I think another part of it is, can increasing the pick and roll volume be something that turns you into an above average offense? And then I think the third one is shot selection. And
absolutely,
it really, and you'll remember this from the past few weeks. I mean, Rudy Gobert has started saying consistently, we need to shoot more threes than twos. And last night he made sure to lay it on thick post game. I think he said we need to shoot more threes than twos 3 or 4 times in his 5 minutes of post game media. And and it's because he's just we make these 39% of the time, and we make our mid-range shots at about the same clip as that. At this point, 50 some games into the season, you're not going to completely gouge out the mid-range there. But I was just thinking about that when you're talking about Finch, and Finch knows that this is what's going on. Well, so does Rudy Gobert. He understands what needs to shift and how important it is to put some of these things together, the turnovers, the type of play calls, and the shot selection, because he knows this team has to have that to be the team that they want to be. And they were that last night in that game. Low turnovers, pick and roll, shot over 50% from three. They did all those things.
And people talk about playoff experience, and that is obviously very important. But there are other types of experience too that enable you to recognize something. And Rudy Gobert has a phenomenal amount of experience with teams that are roaring in the middle of the season and toward the end of the season even, but are also letting bad habits catch up to them and aren't able to make it to the. I mean, if you think about it, Cat's been with this team almost a decade now. He's had three seasons, maybe a third of the time. They've had a team that can be thinking a little bit about how do we do this as we get toward the playoffs.
Right. 2/3
of the time, they're thinking about, how are we rebuilding? How do we change our rotation? Just, baby steps. And so Conley the same way, Slow-Mo the same way. There are people on this team that recognize that this is a workshop time. You've earned, with your really strong first couple of months, you have earned the right to start setting your context in terms of how do we become a sustainable team against all comers in different forms in the playoffs. Yeah. And one of the ways you do it, obviously, is to have an offense that is bankable in certain instances. And, Finch, when we talked to him that day when we were two of the only people at practice, and, he was talking about we have set plays at the end of the game that are working well for us, and they put our best scorers in space. He didn't say they isolate our best scorers so they can score on people. You put them in space so that they can make decisions. And if those decisions are correct, then they're going to be really good decisions. They're going to be the kind of decisions that foster that offense. So
because the isolations are the difficult twos.
Yeah.
They're exactly what you're talking about removing from there. And Carl and Ant are uniquely talented to be able to make those difficult twos at a high clip.
Just often enough to make it be a bad decision.
Exactly. Yeah, that's well put. And I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say they've turned a corner, because the Chicago game was 48 hours ago, but I do feel like in the last 3 games, the Houston, Chicago, and then last night against Milwaukee, to me, it's the most that this team has looked like the old version of themselves, that, as you put in your column, the like 2023 version of themselves for 5 halves of it, right? Whole game against Houston, the first half against Chicago, and then Milwaukee in both.
And they are, I mean, to get back to your point, they are embracing the 3. I mean, they set a team season record for in-game with 23s against Chicago, and then promptly broke that with 21 last night. So, I mean, 2 straight games, they've set the season record for most threes made. And you know, a lot of that is Mike Conley working that high pick and roll with Rudy. By far the most accurate and productive 3-point pick and roll play that I've seen in the NBA. Yeah. And then
Carl's 11 of 22 from 3 in the last 2 games, and I'm just as encouraged by the 22 as I am the 11.
Absolutely. And he does seem to have gotten that memo, and so that's really good. And then Ant, you know, I mean, in my column, I talk about the fact that he ranks 9th in the NBA. This is before last night. I don't know if he went up or down on this, but he ranks 9th in the NBA in mid-range attempts. Yeah. He ranks 46th among the top 50 who take those mid-ranges in his shooting percentage. I mean, you know, guys like Bam Adebayo, you know, are the
I went through the Mexico too. Yeah, it's
just one of those things where a guy that talented who is a career, you know, I mean, he's shooting 39% this year. He's raised his 3-point percentage every year. He's at a career low in terms of the percentage of threes he takes. He's at a career low in terms of the plays he gets 0 to 3 feet. Now, some of that is he's getting to the line a lot more. But at the end of the day, all of his mid-range distances are career highs. Mm-hmm. You know?
And that's the thing that needs to be adjusted. Yes, it does to go away completely. I mean, I when the late game offense stuff was really bad, I thought part of the answer when they were just turning it over all the time, and Ant in particular was turning it over all the time. I'm like, you know, maybe let's just take a mid-range jumper
toward the hoop rather than throw it to the
right. Let me grab our break. We'll keep going here. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company, and me and Britt will be at Falling Knife Brewing Company on February 22nd to do a live show. I guess that's the last day of All-Star break. The Wolves come back on the 23rd. They play Milwaukee on that Friday. But Britt and I will be at Falling Knife on Thursday. We'll get there at 6 and kind of do I'll be setting up, and we'll kind of do meet and greet, a sort of happy hour thing like we have every time we're there. And then we'll do the show from kind of 7 to 8 o'clock and hang out for a little bit afterwards. Been a while since we've done a live show in general, and we're excited to get back to Falling Knife to kind of everybody take 4 or 5 days off for All-Star break to, I guess get excited, set the scene for what I guess it'll be like final 25, 27 games of the regular season. So that's Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. It's always a really fun thing.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. I actually look forward to these because, you get a chance to see some people that, know your work. And so, I mean, they know what you're about. So they're coming up. There's a context there, and it's good to sometimes match a face to, some of the people online who communicate frequently, and just in general, the enthusiasm. I like being challenged by questions. I like, we'll
take a bunch of questions.
Ego massage, that never hurts. But it's just good to connect with people in a kind of setting where everybody's there to talk hoops and be about hoops and drink good beer. So,
yes, and it's not a huge tap room. So I will say, if it's really important for you to get a seat and have that all locked in, do get there at 6. Get there early to lock in a spot. But again, Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. And then just quickly, today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. I was grabbing a pick from each of Chris and Kyle and myself for the Super Bowl. This Sunday, we have the free square of Patrick Mahomes over 0.5 passing yards in that game. Jace had Brock Purdy to throw an interception in that game. Chris said Isaiah Pacheco will go for more than 68.5 rushing yards. I took Deebo Samuel. I was the only person to take a less than. Maybe that's fitting. Less than 59.5 receiving yards. And Kyle gave me his pick this morning. He says Kyle Juszczyk over 4.5 rushing plus receiving yards. These are just a fun thing to do on the Super Bowl. If all 5 of those hit together, you get 10-1 on your money. If hit, you get 2-1. Again, that's prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app. Promo code Dane for a $100 sign-up bonus. All right, Brett, I want to get into your column. I was talking to you before we hit record about how I read your column after the game last night, after the Chicago game,
right?
And I read it after the Milwaukee game, which was actually a good way, I think, to do it, because it was a sort of a stress test of like, you're highlighting the things that have been going wrong in 2024. Chicago game being the latest example of that. And, they go and look like the great or a best version of themselves 48 hours later, which that's just as baked into their DNA, it seems, this year, as the bounce backs after the terrible games. But it was just interesting to read you sort of laying out the differences in this team from before the calendar flipped to 2024. And we've talked about that a little bit. I think it was right around Christmas where the late game offense stuff started to really percolate. Ant flipped in his head that I am the answer here. It was the bullets in the chamber sort of deal. And then they've spent really the past 5-6 weeks trying to overcome that mentality that has been hurting them. And I will say, Ant specifically, like, if they don't lose that Chicago game, I really think we're talking about Ant is back. Like, Ant is the player he was pre-Christmas. And I think individually was. I mean, really, he looked like, not perfect, right, in the Houston, Chicago, or Milwaukee game, but kind of the best version of himself. And when you get that and you don't have the Ant confusion about how should I do, how much shouldn't I do, because sometimes he does too little as well. I feel like he's kind of in that nice zone again, at least for these last 3 games, that reminds you of this team when it was like 22-6 earlier on in the season. I guess just kind of elaborate on that idea of what has kind of changed from 2023 to 2024 and how much of that you think they can get back to for the rest of the season.
Well, I think the defense was incredible. And I think what happened was the defense was spawning good offense. And even with the defense spawning good offense, the offense was not efficient. But it got to the point where the offense began to be so dysfunctional, what we were talking about. It began right around Christmas and led into, I mean, what happened is the pattern just kept getting worse. I mean, Alan Horton pointed out something about how, like, they blow, in the last 4 weeks or something, they've blown 8 games, or anyway, it was some amazing stat. But the offensive dysfunction began to encroach upon the defensive invulnerability. And what would happen in 2023, especially during November and most of December, is that they would come out and just crush teams in the third quarter. I mean, just get to the point where they just could not, the opponent just could not do anything. And the offense took advantage of those turnovers and those stops. And, like when one side of the ball is doing well, it provides momentum to the other side. And the inverse of that, when the other side is really, really dysfunctional, it's hard to maintain an extremely high level at the other end of the court. The defense was so strong that the offense was riding along in 2023. And then the offense became so dysfunctional that the defense was damaged. I think that's the big picture sum up. What I would say is that you had a situation where there was the gleeful joy of realizing that something was working very, very well. And when that happens, anybody who's been on a team, especially basketball with 5 players, which is just the right amount for a teamwork synergy or an obvious breakdown that wrecks the whole thing. But I think what you had was the idea that Rudy discovering that he could trust his teammates behind him if he roamed, the idea that Mike Conley and Ant and Jaden McDaniels and NAW at that time was playing a lot of those games, could really become a suffocating, on ball, pressure the ball, the Finch staple of pressuring the ball, but doing it in a manner where there were a lot of moving pieces, just created a situation where by the fourth quarter, most teams, in 2023, they were 11-1 in crunch time. And in 2024, they were 3-8. And the difference in terms of per 100 possessions is over 40 points. They were 23.7 plus net rating in 2023, minus 21 or something in 2024. And a lot of that was the offense, but a lot of it too, it was a dozen points on defense too, difference. So what I saw last night, to bring it full circle, is we had that third quarter squishing again. We had that just this team came out and just blanketed them. And we also had that defensive movement. Some of it was, you guys didn't get to see it. It's funny. You were at the game and still in Milwaukee, but the Micah Nori had this thing before the game about how the Wolves were going to defend Giannis. And it was like Stan Van Gundy's fucking wall, it's like it's going to be 3 guys out front and they were just going to meet Giannis, before he even got into the paint. And it was extremely informative because sometimes I'm trying to figure out what Gobert is doing, where he is. And Micah laid out, the plan is he was 80% at the rim, 58% in the paint, 33% in the mid-range, and 28% from 3. So the closer he got to the basket, the worse it was. So if he's about to break free, take the foul. It was so anyway, the wall got set up, but of course, when you set up a wall and Giannis gets off it, he had 7 assists, but the team has to fly around. And the fly around was great. And one of the reasons, I think, was because, again, it was this joy of playing defense and playing it well. And that joy got contagious.
I remember at the beginning of the season, we got 10 games in or whatever. You're like, holy shit, this is the best defense in the NBA. Right. And I remember the word I was using all the time was pursuit. Like the wings, they get screened, but the pursuit doesn't stop. And Jaden McDaniels' gangly arm is never out of reach of his man, even in which he's getting screened. And it presented this, like the Star Wars, the 2 walls, like sort of closing in on them, where it's Jaden coming with the rear view contest into the other wall, being Rudy Gobert there at the rim. And it was destructive, like defensively. Exactly. And it still is when they get to that, and they don't consistently get to it. And I don't even think you can expect the team. They are the best defense in the league. And there is just a truism to 82 games. You just can't be that all 82 games. And slowly, as time went on and wear and tear, they've lost a little bit of that. And they did kind of, again, as you creep up to Christmas. And I think then you lose a little bit of that fly around, that pursuit, which takes away a little bit from your offense. You're turning defense into offense, which puts a little bit more stress on your inefficient, below average half-court offense. And then that's where it was kind of like corrosive. It was like, oh, wait, our defense is not going to win us every single one of these games like it was at the beginning of the season. And yeah, it almost creates this sort of like anxiety of like, crap, we have to rely on the thing we're not as good at there. And it's actually, I think, a reason to believe more in this team in the playoffs. We always lay out all the things that are like a concern, X, Y, and Z for the Wolves come the playoffs. But I do think in a playoff game, it's so much more likely that you're going to get that fly around. You're going to get that pursuit. You're going to probably get fourth quarter defensive Rudy a lot. I mean, for a lot more minutes within the course of the game. And that gives, if that can happen, right? If you can be that defense and you can do some of these things offensively that we're talking about, of even just boosting you up to slightly above average offensively. Now you got a team. Now you got a team that is put up any of those teams in the West. And yeah, we got to talk about matchups. And yeah, we got to like, there's better and worse matchups there. And you're going to have to do things differently. But if you get that, you can make a case for the Wolves in a playoff series, at least on paper, that they can beat, any of these teams that they're going to play, and, playoff experience, whatever, all those things are factors in there too. But that's what it's got to be, right? You've got to be that defensive team and the offensive team that it can be. And as they were last night.
It comes down to trust. The defense is far more trusting of each other than the offense. And so on defense, the fact that Rudy is clearly the beacon of everything that happens on that team's defense, and when he is trusting people, he is both talking to them, encouraging them, but also playing like, I've got this because that teammate over there I know is going to get that. And that trust is so important. On offense, it's about Ant and Cat trusting getting off the ball, trusting that they'll either get it back or that somebody's going to be able to do something. I've noticed that Ant looks for Mike Conley more than any other teammate. And I think it's because he really, really reveres, maybe too strong a word, but if you talk about a guy who Ant respects as an elder in the hallowed sense of the word, Ant and Mike Conley have an incredible bond, and that extends out on the court. Anthony Edwards trusts that Mike Conley will make the right play if he gets him the ball. And last night, 3 of Conley's trays were from Ant. And Ant needs to be able to trust people more than Conley, and he needs to be able to get off the ball. And if that happens, that's extremely important. It also gives Cat a little sense of things. I want to just say one more thing, and that is that it seems like in the modern NBA, where whistles are so important and so up and down, players have to go through just venting a frustration and just making a mess out of themselves and all around them because of their frustration. Cat has done it. Ant just got through with it. When you talk about lately, we've seen Ant in the last few games, handful of games, the best Ant. It came after he had one more snit after he got fined and then continued to be a jerk about everything and continued to be distracted by what kind of whistle he was getting. And it's no coincidence that this team is beginning to hum on offense now, because they don't care about the officials the last couple of games. It's really important.
Well, Chicago,
it gets back to that trust thing.
Yeah, no, I really like the idea of trust in that. It's getting the trust in Rudy to match, or I guess getting the trust in Ant and Cat on offense to match the trust they have in Rudy on defense.
Yep.
And those are, that's obviously Cat and Ant are really talented offensive players, but there's, maybe it's part because it's defense, or maybe it's just because Rudy's the very best defensive player in the league and Ant and Cat are just really good offensive players, right? Mm-hmm. But there is a greater bankability. We all know that from watching it, and you can totally tell the players do too. It's not that they don't trust Cat and Ant. They trust Rudy on defense. more, because that's what Rudy is like, if Rudy was a really good offensive player, he would be an extremely precise offensive player. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's just a bankability to what he is good at. And there's a more erratic nature to the offense of Ant and Cat. And, you can double team a guy on offense. You can't double team a guy on defense. So I think it's a greater challenge for Cat and Ant. And it's obviously the greater challenge for this team because, they're 17th on offense or whatever, and first on defense. Like this is just a truism of where this team is right now. But yeah, I think getting that to grow, getting that trust in the offense, specifically in your top two guys, and then those top two guys trusting those around them, which they have done a significantly better job in, that's going to make the offense better. That's going to make the turnovers go down. The offensive fouls, barreling into all that. It's going to get rid of the, bull in a china shop drives from both Ant and Cat that don't get the foul, and then the hands get raised or they're laying on the ground and it's 5-on-4 the other way. That's just what this comes down to is this team going to do that or are they not going to be able to do it this year?
And some people would say it's a chicken or the egg thing and that naturally these two things are linked. But I think dribbling in space, surveying the floor, driving into traffic, and complaining about the calls are three things that are all by nature deadly. They're fatal to this offense. And I think their record, when there is a lot of dribbling, when there is a lot of driving into traffic, and when there's a lot of complaining about the refs, has got to be hard. I mean, for this team to be, 20, close to 20 games over 500 right now, I can count a dozen games where what I've just described predominates. And if they've won one or two of those, I'd be shocked. Right. So again, I mean, what I want to keep emphasizing is this isn't rocket science. And there has to be a time when it gets through their thick skulls that they need to play a certain way. And if they play that way, glory will rain on them. And if they don't, they're exposing themselves as being chuckleheads, and they need to cut it out. I mean, the idea that, people say that Finch throws his players under the bus. Man, I would get a tank. I would throw them under a tank at this point.
Go check out Britt's column. I would particularly recommend like the Ant and Finch segment in the middle of it. The line you had, what was it? Where Finch, you started off, and we were kind of talking about it in the lens of Ant being an all-star and Finch being the all-star head coach. Talk about the mutual respect that those two clearly have for each other.
And the fact that individually Finch's coaching and Ant's playing are two of the top attributes this team has.
Sure.
But, you said if they are on the same page, they are reading it in different languages. And I was like, man, that is so true, and it's the shot selection stuff we do. I mean, it's just a really interesting collision of a respect for each other, but a totally different view on the game, and what the best way in which to play it is. And the Ant element of it is so interesting to me. I mean, he is smart enough to know and says that like you said with Mike Conley, these guys know more than me. They understand this stuff. Finch knows more than me. I need to be listening to him. But then, which I don't think we probably give enough grace to, is what it's like to just have that talent. Right.
And to be able to get yourself to be all right, I am going to somewhat put this talent to the side where I can make this crazy shot that only 5 other whatever, and just be nope, I'm going to do the thing that Mike Conley and Chris Finch and Rudy Gobert want me to do. And it's this internal struggle within Ant that he leans into sometimes,
Right.
and strays away from, Finch's view of what it should be. It gives them some special highs of what Ant can do when Ant is like on fire.
Right.
But it also has so directly led to the fourth quarter crumbles that we've seen as well, when Ant, whether it's the opponent doubling him or throwing a different look at it, just doesn't allow him to efficiently kind of hit that superstar mode. I just thought that was a really good way to put it. And it's a kind of fascinating combination of their two, I don't know, their brains, right? Basketball brains.
Well, to put it on a more relatable level, I think it's like your parents telling you to clean your room, or your mother telling you to clean your room, and who hasn't basically said, or, take out the trash, clean your room, whatever. There is this reminder. Parents are there to remind you to do things. And when you say, I will, you're totally sincere about it. But, it's my room, or the trash, they're not going to come pick it up until tomorrow or whatever. There's always going to be something where there's just a part of you that is obtuse, and you just don't, you give into it sometimes just because you can, because at the end of the day, what are they going to do to you?
Mm-hmm.
They're not
yeah, right.
I mean, there isn't like the harm is not really harmful. And they're coming at you from a position of, this is for both of our goods, and it's done with love and everything, and you honestly love them back. But guess what? I'm just not going to do it right now. And I don't know where that comes from, but it is a fairly
it's angst. It's a coming of age thing.
Yeah, it's a fairly universal thing. I mean, and I think it's just, I understand it. I just think at some point in time, the fallout, and everybody, I know, we've talked about it many, many times. It's a legitimate thing, and has that competitive, I need to win inside him. And sooner or later, hopefully sooner, and it seems like increasingly, I think he's coming out of it, that competitive desire, this is the way to win, will overtake this kind of angsty thing that you're talking about. Yeah. And that process can't come soon enough for this Wolves team. And what I find interesting is that Cat tends to follow Ant's lead. If Ant is being, all right, let's take on these MFers, let's, I got the dribble, here we go. Cat will go, yeah,
me too.
Yeah. My time.
It's the two teenage brothers against the parent, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, that's why last night, and the Bucks did help out their defense. Doc Rivers has not been the answer. That they don't have Drew Holiday. Who knew that Drew Holiday for Dame Lillard was at the very least even up? In terms of
and then not replacing perimeter deep. I mean, they've replaced Drew Holiday functionally with Malik Beasley, actually, on the defense,
which is absurd. I mean, anybody who's been a Wolves fan during Malik Beasley's tenure here knows that he talks a good game and he shows a decent game, but the last 15 to 20% of what you need to do to finish off a good defensive possession is beyond him. Yeah, he can stay with a guy in terms of looking good, but he cannot do more than look good on defense. He cannot be good.
It's a Halloween costume.
Yeah. That's a great line. I totally agree.
All right, let's move into Monte Morris. And I mean, I did a quick little right afterwards episode on it, and it was actually, for listeners, if you haven't checked that out yet, I'd recommend it, because I had Ryan Blackburn on, who covers the Nuggets, and has for a long time, and he really detailed, saved me a lot of needing to watch film time, of just having that storehouse knowledge of covering a player. You just kind of know the ins and outs, and I thought that was really helpful to just. I mean, the first thing he said was Mike Conley light, And I think that's the vision of this move, right, Britt? Is 48 minutes of Mike. Obviously, discount Mike or whatever, and we got to see if Monte Morris is healthy and shape. And it was a couple years ago that he filled in for Jamal Murray when he was hurt, and Morris was great that season. Like we don't know what Ryan was talking about, that version of Monte Morris. We don't know if that still exists. But in theory, the style, the archetype of point guard that Monte Morris is Mike, and it gives you some insurance policy there over the course of the game. I think about coming out of the break. I think they have 3 back-to-backs like right away. I think the first 6 games are maybe back-to-backs, or maybe there's a 7th game in there somewhere, but it's gonna be a lot more back-to-backs the rest of the way. And I think Morris gives them, if Mike needs a night off, you can maybe start him there, or just if you tone down Conley's minutes, he can fill in there some. I mean, I guess I think we all kind of have like the same answer of what we think Morris can help here, but I'm just curious. You and I haven't talked at all about the things that happened.
I really like the deal. I thought in terms of the credibility, I thought that the Washington season after that Denver season you're talking about really extends the notion that he can be that kind of player. The team obviously was not nearly as talented. He did have Beal, who I think was hurt a lot, but
Porzingis was really good last year.
That's true. But his assist to turnover ratio stayed really, really high. I mean, it's like 639 assists and 140 turnovers or something. Anyway, it was 4.8 is his assist to turnover ratio. And that's starting over 130 games. I mean, he started over 70 for Denver, and he started over 60 for Washington. He was the starting point guard 2 years in a row before this season. So it was just last year that he was finishing up his 2nd year as a starting point guard with an assist to turnover ratio of nearly 5-1. Also, he was in both seasons hit over 38% of his threes.
Yep.
So,
he hasn't had a bad 3-point shooting year.
Except for this year.
Well,
I mean, he's only played 68 minutes, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I was seeing some of that of like, oh, he's washed. Look, he's shooting 18% from 3. He's taken 11 threes this year. I watched him.
And,
2 of them were half court heat.
Coming off a quad injury, for God's sake. I mean, so, but I went back and looked at a lot of clips, especially in the Denver time.
I haven't really been able to. I've just been here. I haven't had the chance to watch a lot of the Denver stuff yet.
What is really encouraging to me is he knows his place. He if he has an open shot, he'll take it. If he's running a pick and roll and they're clearly going with the roll man, he will stay with the ball and try to finish. But when he can be deferential, he is deferential, and he makes good decisions. His mid-range and at the rim game did not look that impressive to me, but
the numbers are really good though. I think he's only taken them. It was like that Denver year was like almost 70% at the rim, and I think it was 48% from mid-range.
All right, good.
And I mean, real. I think
that may owe to his decision making. He may be, again, he doesn't force anything he can't force. I do remember, not only the year he started in Denver, but the year he had to fill in. I think Murray got hurt the year before as well. And he really had to, and he was also part of that bench unit with Beasley, as it turns out, in that time about 4 years ago.
Right.
And it was interesting to me to watch. He hit big shots, and he also helped the team. He's been a plus-minus guy his entire career. I would say even more than Conley light. He might be Tyus Jones light in some respects.
For sure. I mean, I think it looks, just having watched a lot of the clips and, having watched a lot of Tyus Jones, I mean, that's just the comparison I would make. I mean, it looks extremely similar. Tyus doesn't really like come in and take 16-foot mid-range jumpers, like real
Right.
jumpers. He gets in about to 12 and takes the
Right.
floater.
That's true. And that is a difference. Right.
But I mean, largely I was just going, and you're like, oh, Monte Morris, like great assist to turnover ratio. So
And,
went to the leaderboard. Did you see this? 2018-19.
Yeah, that was a cool tweet.
First in assist to turnover ratio, Tyus Jones. Second in assist to turnover ratio, Monte Morris. 2019-20, best assist to turnover ratio, Tyus Jones. Second best in the league, Monte Morris. 2020-21, best assist to turnover ratio, Tyus Jones. Second best, Monte Morris. The next year, 2021-22, best assist to turnover ratio, Tyus Jones. Second best was Trey Jones. Monte Morris was fifth. The year after that, 2022-23, this is the Washington year. Best assist to turnover ratio, Tyus Jones. Second best, Monte Morris. And then this year, the two best assist to turnover ratios are Tyus Jones and Mike Conley. Mike Conley was right around the top 5 in all those too. So the Wolves are like, holy shit, we have a turnover problem. These are the guys who are the very best at it. They, considered Tyus Jones as well. They deeply believe that, they just need to inject more ball control into this team. It's very much actually to, the bench version of it. It very much reminds me of the thought process behind the Gobert trade, where in that 21-22 season, the Wolves couldn't play drop coverage to save their life. They couldn't defend, defensive rebound. Couldn't defend the rim. They go, okay, we'll go get the guy who is the very best at rim protection, drop coverage, and at defensive rebounding, Rudy Gobert. And they went and looked at their issues of this team this season, turnovers, and they said, all right, the best available, or maybe Tyus would be, so the second best, apparently, according to those lists. And they plugged that in there. I don't believe that those equations work. I don't think that you do that, it exactly fixes the problem, as we've learned with Gobert, but you get the thought process behind it. And when an issue like the rebounding was so egregious pre-Gobert, you have to address it to some degree, and they have to address the turnover issue here. And, I think that's what they did with Morris.
And a big difference between the Gobert deal and the Monte Morris deal is the lack of disruption that comes from the Monte Morris deal.
That's a great
point. Idea that you can get this guy and punt less than $1 million to make it happen, and to have the same situation, assuming they weren't going to re-sign Troy Brown Jr. and Shake Morris. They had options on both of them next year, and that Monte Morris has an expiring. So, the cost certainty isn't the same. But don't you get the impression Monte Morris signed that contract at a time when his value was close to peak value? He may be.
Tim Conley gave him that.
He may be a Nickeil Alexander-Walker type who suddenly he says, hey, this is a really good fit for me. I like the way this team works. I'll take a little less to stick around and be in this rotation.
Well,
if they can find that, and also the whole idea of, Mike Conley's not getting any younger, I can find myself once again being, if not the starter, a very important presence on a very good team. That may be worth, maybe a slight pay cut or no more, and certainly not a raise from the 9-8 he's getting now.
Let's call it 7. Let's just say, that's what Monte Morris's next contract was going to be 7. Well, if they didn't trade for Monte Morris, they're not going to have the mid-level exception. They obviously don't have cap space. There would be no way for them to sign Monte Morris in the offseason. Now, by acquiring him, you get, as I talked about this in the last episode too, you get his bird rights, which allows you the opportunity to offer him the next, you don't need cap. If you have someone's bird rights, you don't need cap space. You don't need a mid-level exception to be able to do that. So now, if Monte Morris's value next contract is $7 million a year, and the Wolves deem that they want that, well, they can give that to him. And at what cost, right? Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr., two guys who weren't playing, and then their most distant second-round pick. Just paying a second-round pick to have the potential to be able to sign a backup point guard or a point guard that you feel like could potentially fit your system, that's just the opportunity cost there. Just checks out big time.
And he is somebody who can give you a bucket from distance
Yeah.
off the bench. I mean, and aside from Nas Reed, that just hasn't existed. You know, I mean, NAW has been surprisingly good at it. But I do notice a lot of that is shot selection and playing with the first unit. He gets a lot of those nice dishes. So, yeah, I mean, I think the bench is a little thin, you know, but on the other hand, it's better because you're not rolling dice with bad dice.
I asked Finch about Morris after the game. We were finally able to ask him about it once the deal went through. This is what Finch had to say.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be just to have another, you know, he's a winner. He's just kind of makes the right play, super solid, low turnover guy. You know, he's used to really playing with a lot of, you know, playing off of a lot of kind of star players really well. I think like it's a fairly seamless kind of partnership with Mike. You know, it's not like you have like this other type of guard that you have to adjust to. And just, you know, just his high basketball IQ, like you can't have enough of those guys. And, you know, I didn't cross paths with him in Denver. I had left the season before he came, but I've heard nothing but amazing things. You know, I was able to talk to him, and you know, just really, 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 you know, excited to have him. You know.
You kind of envision the role he might have. What does it kind of look like in your mind? What, minutes or this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly minutes to be had there. You know, guys like, you know, Jaden and Mike, of course, have been logging heavy minutes. You know, I think Ant, you know, we've been pushing his minutes out a little bit, like in this period of time here in the run up to the All-Star break. Maybe we can steal a couple from him. So I don't think finding minutes will be a problem. It's just we're gonna, you know, find the right combinations of guys, and that's kind of the fun part about it.
That will be the interesting part, right, Brett, is figuring out what it is, because that isn't a role. You know, that isn't a role, taking 3 minutes away from McDaniels, Conley, and Ant. He needs a baseline part of his role, which I think is the J-Mac. You know, 9 minutes a night or whatever it is, a 5 or 6 minute stint in the first half, 5 or 6 minute stint in the second half if he gets one. I mean, that's maybe not immediately, but are we expecting Morris to be in that 9th spot in the pecking order, keeping Nikhil, Nas, and Kyle Anderson above him?
Yes. And I think that I think what he meant by Jaden, to be honest with you, is that Kyle Anderson doesn't necessarily have to be the de facto point guard of the second unit anymore. And therefore he can be on the floor with, you know, he can be giving Jaden minutes off at the 3 in that first unit if they want to go rotation that way. And I think with Ant doesn't necessarily need to be on the floor with the second unit all the time because they don't have enough shooting. This is actually it's. I think what he was talking about when he referenced both Ant and Jaden is kind of talking about the fact that we have a shooter off the bench as well as a playmaker, because when Slow-Mo is with the second unit, you don't have a shooter. And when Ant is on the bench, you don't have a shooter. Now you can give Ant some bench time, and now you can give Slow-Mo some time that isn't with the second unit. Both of those things happen because there's a little bit more procreative scoring that doesn't rely on Slow-Mo's playmaking or Ant's offense, would be my take. I don't know if it's true, but that's the way I would look at it.
Brett, can we do a little looking back on the Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Mike Conley trade
Sure.
A year later? That was just on my mind.
Best trade in Wolves history.
Seriously.
It was. I mean, I did a story on it. I did a column. I'm looking at all of them. Jim Pete had Tom Gugliotta ahead of it, which I got to think is just the book isn't totally closed. It's only been a year, but I mean, come on. I mean, you know, just first of all, you get rid of D'Lo. They did get rid of Daniel Marshall for Gugliotta. I mean, it was like that Gugliotta deal was in my top 5 as well, maybe even second or third. But there's no way that Tom Gugliotta being acquired is a better trade acquisition than Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, especially at the cost of losing D'Lo.
Yeah, I mean,
cost in quotes.
It was, the value. I think first and foremost, the value that Mike brought to the roster and his style of play as a point guard versus D'Lo's style of play as a point guard, which had kind of even stopped being a point guard. He's
running into the same trouble. I mean, he ran into. He hasn't. There's a reason he's been on 6 teams in 5 years.
I don't want it. We don't got.
Yeah, I know. But I'm just saying, it's just
right.
It isn't. He doesn't play a position that he theoretically is supposed to play, and that can create a lot of problems. And Mike Conley can only play one position really, and that is point guard. Even
and every team he's been on has benefited.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a huge difference.
And I think, that alone would have been a win. Conley for D'Lo there. I would also, point to, 3 seconds doesn't sound like a lot that they got in that trade. But when you're a team who has no firsts to be able to trade, having those seconds allowed them to trade up to get Leonard Miller, which, obviously to be
was
determined.
Their first round pick, right?
Yeah. But it gave him the ammo to be able to do that, and then to go and be able to add another piece at the deadline here in Monte Morris. I think if you don't make the D'Lo for Conley trade, you maybe don't have the assets to go be able to get Monte Morris. We'll see how well, that all ages. But right now it makes, again, on paper, makes a bunch of sense. I don't know if it's the biggest part of it, but it's my favorite story from that trade is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And I think his role on this team is obviously extremely important. We've talked about that in length, but the story part of it is kind of the person element of it and what he's been able to grow in and be when that, was largely looked at as a throw in that trade, a potential diamond in the rough, and it's just turned out to be a diamond. And I asked Nickeil about this at shoot around before the game against Milwaukee, just what's grown the most in his game. And I think what has grown most in his game is what has made him such an integral part of it. Here's Nickeil, what he had to say.
Where do you think your game has grown the most in this year?
I would say decision making in the paint. I remember like my rookie year, we and my friends probably even Finch would say it himself. Getting into the paint, I was always trying to drive, trying to score. My mindset, I think when I drive, a lot of times me and Joe talk about it, just the points per possession on kickouts through drives. So get under control, reading the game, stuff like that. I think for me has been one of the improvements. So I look back, I'm like, dang, I'm actually really, really good at that. That's something I trust now, like to be aggressive and to make a play for somebody else outside of myself. And I would say defensively, I'm constantly making a stride further to be better.
But it was interesting, to go back and look at the numbers from that rookie season from Nickeil. In 2019-20, only 6 players that played over 500 minutes shot a worse percentage at the rim than Nickeil did that season. It's 45%. And only 19 of those 500-plus minute guys turned it over at a higher rate than Nickeil Alexander-Walker did that season. I mean, that's what he was kind of supposed to be. And right away, it was like he's nowhere near being able to do that. Well, you look now 4 years later at where it's at, and he's up to 63% at the rim, and his turnover rate has dropped to 12.6%, down from 15.4. So he's gone from the very bottom of the barrel in that to that's about league average for his position there. And then also it's not just the making it at the basket or the not turning it over. He's become like those numbers that say it's league average undersell it because they don't capture when he gets to the basket and is able to kick. He's ambidextrous. He's throwing 70-mile-an-hour fastballs with his left hand into the opposite corner for Naz Reid or Cat up at the top of the floor. And while he hasn't been a great pick and roll scorer, he's been well below average in that when he comes off the screen and tries to go score himself. He's been able to score a little bit on that. But I was looking at it, just if you isolate from when he runs pick and roll and he makes a pass and that player takes a shot, it's 1.24 points per possession this season, which is just that. I mean, one is great.
Right.
I looked it up. Tyrese Halliburton on the season in pick and roll, granted, he runs a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
His is 1.23. Obviously, Nikhil, if you scaled it, it probably wouldn't be that. But just to loop back in the trade thing, to not only get a player that can help, but to be able to foster his development into becoming really, I think you can make the case that he's the sixth man on this team. I mean, not to say that Naz has had a bad season, but it's kind of like should Rudy be an all-star or should Cat? Well, it's like, I don't know. They're the number one defense. And then between Naz and Nikhil, it's like, well, Nikhil's one of their best defenders. I just think it's that part of it is a major win. And I think, that, and those people that are watching this team very closely know that Nikhil Alexander-Walker has been a godsend for them. But I think it's worth, remembering a year later.
I think what's very important is confidence.
Yeah.
And he had so much turbulence early in his career. As you said, what he was supposed to be coming out of school, he was not, to the point where he could have been, like Kevin Knox or something, some guy who was like, going to be somebody who was a journeyman. People always hoping that they could tap into whatever it was people saw in him when they drafted him. And he had a makeup that he just needed some positive reinforcement. And you got to give Chris Finch a lot of credit. First of all, he recommended when Tim Connolly made that deal and people raised why was Nikhil involved in it. He said Finch specifically recommended that inclusion. Finch had him his rookie year.
Yeah, he was there. He saw the 45% at the rim and the insane turnover rate.
And I think that he had a niche for himself, especially after Jaden went down last year, after he came over. He came over in February, like a year ago, yesterday or whatever it was, and really proved himself in the play-in against Shea, and did a really good job on Murray in the playoffs. I thought, quite frankly, he was one of the 2 or 3 best players on the team in that first round series. A lot of it because of what he did in making Murray work. And so he had a niche there. But Jaden was obviously, it's a starting 5 that's going to be very hard to crack. And he didn't get off to a great start in the starting lineup. It was obvious, people were ready for Jaden to come back when he came back. But as he settled in more, and as his offense and his ability to see the court and make the right decisions, as he just got through talking about, began to come more and more into focus, and his shot began to go down. I just think he was coached well, not only by Finch, but by the staff. The situation, people were patient with him. They featured him. I thought it was kind of interesting that they kind of waited him out in the free agency period. I thought that was kind of weird, but and got him for a bargain price. But they have been good to each other in terms of what's happened in terms of his development. And I just think that one of the reasons he's a fan favorite and one of the reasons why we all really like him is because goodness just exudes off of him. He is an unpretentiously nice guy who wants to give you the time of day, is totally honest about himself, warts and all, and really does seem to treasure and recognize what he believes is a privileged situation for him right now.
Yeah.
And in the NBA, where so many people have been venerated and fawned over their entire careers, to the point where when it's not going well and they have adversity, they have a tendency to blame others. And then when they come out of that adversity, sometimes don't learn from it, sometimes say, all right, things are finally back where they should be, and they have an attitude. And this is not everybody, but there is enough of that attitude in the NBA. You see that in players. When you see somebody,
you need the coach to be able to like pull that out of you. And Finch has talked about how, he was there in New Orleans with Nickeil, and he thought back then that Nickeil was miscast into what the role the front office was kind of in New Orleans was trying to make, Nickeil be. Finch said this was the type of player he thought Nickeil always was, and then it would be a best place to start,
right?
And then kind of build from there. As good of a dude in his heart of working as Nickeil Alexander-Walker is or appears to be, it's not that doesn't take you anywhere without a coach that kind of puts you in a position to do those things. Because he could have been like, they could have brought him in and they could have been like, nope, you're the Jalen Noel out, you're the backup point guard here for this team, and we just want you to run the offense, right? And that's your job. Well, if that would have been the job he was given a year ago, he's probably not even back on the team, and he's certainly not the player he is today. So I don't know if that's Finch, Conley, whatever, but the recognition of putting him in the position that appears to be the best position for him, it's made him the sixth man. I mean, the sixth man on the best team in the best record in the West. That's a coup, man. That's huge.
And his ability to negotiate screens,
incredible,
is extraordinary. And that's trial and error in the NBA. You don't come into the NBA knowing how to get through NBA screens. I mean, maybe Chris Dunn is about the only guy I can think of as a rookie that I saw that went, wow, that guy breaks up screens as a rookie. I mean, it just doesn't happen very often. And the way he does that is a combination of, sometimes he goes over the screen, sometimes he goes under the screen. But there is a combination. Exactly. I was about to say the combination of he has a plan and he has a purpose of how to execute that plan as it's happening. It's an instinctual thing that also involves prior knowledge of what he wants to do. But it's one of those things that'll never appear on a stat sheet. But if NAW is on you, odds are if you're running pick and roll, you're in for a harder time than you thought you were going to be.
Absolutely.
And that is that is a frustrating thing for a player who just usually plays pick and roll and expects a certain level of space when they're executing it.
You ever think about or where do you think this team would be if they didn't get Mike Conley in that trade?
I think they'd be in disarray.
It's hard to make a case that they wouldn't be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is, first of all, Rudy Gobert has to, he should, give Mike a big chunk of his salary every day at this point. Mike Conley gave Rudy Gobert credibility on the offensive end that he otherwise would not have. I mean, he just would not have it because Kyle Anderson did a great job before Conley showed up. But it was spoon feeding. I mean, it was like a guy in a high chair and baby food, going, or like a bird with their, it was so obvious. This is what I'm going to do for you now, Rudy. I'm going to throw the ball up in the air and you're going to catch it and put it in. And Mike Conley had experience with him, had gone through the rough spots and knew how to run a smooth pick and roll, which was impossible with any other player on the team, including Slow-Mo. Mike Conley came and they began to run smooth pick and rolls, and you went, oh, okay. He isn't a total klutz,
And now we're talking about it being the answer for fixing the Timberwolves.
Exactly. And a lot of that, again, having him around and then being able to have a veteran who knows how to play, not fly around defense and not all this other highfalutin things that Rudy probably disparaged coming in. And it became, whenever it is something where you're trying to change something and the other side doesn't want to change, you just dig in. Well, all of a sudden, if you have arguments for your side and more credibility for your side, that's when you begin to listen to the other side. You say, okay, I don't have to prove myself anymore. We are doing things a certain way that work. Now I will also listen to what they want. Rudy became, I think, a lot more open-minded and a lot less stubborn because of Mike. And then, you know, I mean, what would happen with Ant? I mean, Anthony Edwards is a more mature dude. I mean, you and I in the locker room are more mature dudes just talking to that guy. You know, I mean, he is, he's coach material if he ever wanted to be. I can't imagine him not being a successful coach. I mean, if he wants to run a NBA basketball team, he will be very good at it.
Yeah, it's a crazy thought, you know, to revisionist history that in a different way. I mean, shout out Russell Westbrook for needing to have his salary dumped to the Utah Jazz and kind of making this all possible. And, you know, and obviously credit to the front office for jumping on that. But yeah, man, I if you think about that alternative path, if that just doesn't happen, or if Mike Conley in that trade goes to the Lakers and something else happens to the Wolves, yeah, I don't know. Literally 365 days later, where this Wolves team is at, like, which is funny. Where they're at is they're like, we actually need more Mike Conley. How do we get 16 more minutes a night of Mike Conley? Okay, we're gonna go trade for the player who's most like Mike Conley. I mean, Mike Conley has become the blueprint of the Timberwolves. Like, he's not the star player, and a lot of people, you know, outside of Minnesota, like, oh yeah, Mike Conley, like, you know, good, solid star player. There is not an understanding that, maybe the way to put it is, Mike Conley wrote the blueprint, made copies of it, passed it around to everyone else in the locker room, and was like, all right, you know, if we do this, we're going to empower this player that you just traded everything for. And if you don't empower him, you're going to be screwed. Mm-hmm. And he did it in a very, like, unassuming Mike Conley way, as he does. It's
yeah. And you know what I suspect? I suspect that people in Memphis and Utah already know this. I think it is one of those things that it's one, you have to be there, you have to see it. Mm-hmm. But that grit and grind team, if you think about it,
right? Who
were the shooters? You know, I mean, on Memphis, it was, I mean, Tony Allen, Marcus Gasol, okay, was, you know, he had his times. But that team wasn't loaded with shooters, and they played a grinding defense. But I remember Mike Conley, even back then, I didn't appreciate it nearly to the extent I do now, as the regulator. And one could argue that Mike Conley's firm embrace of the things that will not get you recognized is why he is so good. And the absence of ego in terms of needing to be noticed. I think the guy's made one All-Star team in his entire career. He will be in the Hall of Fame anyway, because his body of work is just phenomenal. And, you know, I've got to even
remember when Finch said that one time. He goes, I wonder what the stat is for how many days in Mike Conley's career he's been on the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. Right. Actually, I think Jace looked it up or something. I don't remember what it was, but that right there, maybe some people are like Hall of Fame. That right there is Mike Conley's Hall of Fame candidacy is that number, and everything that lies beneath that, like you said, you have to kind of be there to appreciate. But yeah, in 1 year, we certainly appreciate it. the front office and the locker room, and Chris Finch does tenfold to even what we do.
What Chris Finch and Tim Connolly have done in this last 18 months, I've got to, you know, I mean, I was a huge skeptic of Gobert. I didn't like the way Conley came in, and it is just very obvious now that whether it was A-Rod and Laurie, who are two other guys I like to punch, they argued for Conley's hiring. It was a big splash. They gave him a ton of money. I thought it was just a bunch of, ownership, ego, young guys who didn't really know the game, trying to put themselves in a situation that they were clueless about. Even if it was accidental, you gotta hand it to him. It was what has happened with this Timberwolves team has been a rehabilitation of competence that has been extraordinary. I mean, I've been here for the entire thing except for the first year, and after Garnett left, this team became the stumble bums of all professional team sports. And the Tibbs blip was fun. The Jimmy Butler time was eventful, and that produced some really good moments. But what has happened since Finch replaced Ryan Saunders and then Conley replaced Rosas and eventually Sasha Gupta, who I think did a decent job in the holdover spot, did well, is just
and then Laurie and A-Rod replaced Taylor.
Yeah, and Taylor went along with it, went along with their plans, and you got to give him credit for that. But I think the most credit belongs to Tim Connelly for sticking his neck out and getting Rudy Gobert, doubling down, and then making the Conley trade, making the Monte Morris trade. Whatever we're going to think about the Monte Morris trade, let's say it doesn't work out. Yeah. There is superb reasoning behind it. It is a good thing for the salary cap. It is a good thing for the locker room. It is a good thing for the style of play they want to play. It is an extremely sound decision. And
they all have been, right? It's like, you think about that, all the trades are coming through yesterday.
Gobert, you mean all the trade deadline? Yeah, okay. I thought you meant the war.
where I guess, isolate the Gobert thing, put that up there. That's its own weird thing. But, following like the trade deadline and NBA transactions closely, there's just a handful of those teams where you're like, what are they doing? Right. Make, the Detroits and what's Toronto doing? Right. There hasn't been a move on the margins that has not like totally checked out the logic of it. And then they've grown to be even better than that. Like you're like, okay, I get the Mike Conley move there. I get the Kyle Anderson signing, all of these somewhat marginal things that they did have proven real value without ever paying significant compensation for them. Now they did the significant compensation for the Rudy thing, and that's an hour-long conversation in and of itself. But it's a good feeling to have a trust in your front office that they aren't going to do anything just wildly dumb. Again, in the marginal things, I know some people are still there's arguments to be made about the Gobert thing, but I think that's when teams go from good to great, they nail those marginal moves at such a high rate with such a low risk of what they've given up. And to that end, this front office seems to have really nailed that. And, Monte Morris will be the next thing there. Britt, I got to check out of my room here at the hotel.
No problem.
But this was fun. I'm glad we both got a good basketball game and an interesting trade deadline this week. We got a handful of days off now. No game Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and then it's the rest of the road trip before the All-Star break.
Are you going to Portland? I know you're probably not going to LA, right?
I'm not going to LA because that's a back-to-back. But yeah, I'm gonna be in Portland all Monday through Friday. Next week they play in Portland on Tuesday, Thursday. So actually, Kyle didn't do a pod with me this week. He was out of town. But for listeners, it'll be a lot of me and Kyle. And Kyle lives in Portland, and we'll be I guess kind of covering the those two Portland games in a similar way to how we've covered these Bulls and Bucks games this week. So yeah, that's 3 more games, right? That's it, right? 3 more until the All-Star break, and we'll see. I do appreciate you doing it. I do think the column holds from that came out after the Bulls game. It's honestly maybe a little bit more interesting to read after a bounce back game, because it gives you that stress test of, that not being totally results oriented. So I'd really recommend that. What's the title? It's on Britt's Twitter. But another second half collapse is real cause for concern for the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's maybe a little hot of a headline because you go into a lot of other stuff there below. But do check that out over at Min Post. And yeah, we'll talk to Britt next week, and then keep that February 22nd date on your calendars for a live show with Britt and I at Falling Knife, where we'll kind of, I guess, preview the rest, the post All-Star break part of the season. And we always we'll bring a third mic, and we like taking listener or people who are there questions there. So we'll dig into all that too. He's Britt Robson. Follow him on Twitter at Britt Robson. I'm Dane at DaneMooreNBA. Until next week after the Clippers game, he's Britt, I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring